Exodus, the biblical Moses that Hollywood forgot. Actually, now that I'm looking at the slide, I realize I forgot to put a little TM after that title. But nonetheless, whether it's trademarked on the slide, it is indelibly marked in our minds and hearts as we've gone through this series thus far. And previously, in Exodus, the biblical Moses that Hollywood forgot, TM, we have the birth of Moses, 1526 BC, found in the bulrushes, protected by his mother for 3 months, put in a little ark, floated down the Nile under the supervision of Miriam, found by the princess of Egypt, adopted by her formally, but only after this child is raised by his own mother, who serves as a witness, Yocheved, for 3, 4, perhaps even 5 years. He is raised under her tutelage. Then he is formally adopted into the kingdom of the royal family of Egypt. He identifies himself, of course, at a point in his life as a Hebrew, as an Israelite. Not a surprise to him, unlike what Hollywood presents. But nonetheless, he slays an Egyptian who is brutalizing a Hebrew slave and buries the body. It is found out, and his own people disrespect him and do not recognize his leadership. This is just immediately prior to where we're going to be this morning. Verse 14, he said, "Who made you a prince or a judge over us?" Speaking to Moses. "Are you intending to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" And Moses was afraid and said, "Surely the matter has become known." Thus, the matter that in trying to protect an Israelite slave, he has murdered an Egyptian who had been brutalizing him. But the Jewish people were not ready for a deliverer, and they reject him. But when Pharaoh heard of it, the Jewish people are not the only ones who are going to reject Moses, as the royal household is going to reject him as well. Pharaoh heard of this matter. He tried to kill Moses. Why? Because he violated sacred Egyptian law. No matter who you are, you violated it, you murdered somebody, there's going to be capital punishment. But Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh. He had to hightail it, in other words, out of Egypt very quickly. And he settled in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Why did he sit down by a well? Yeah, because he was thirsty. Exactly right. You don't have to be a theologian, right? You read commentaries. Well, a well symbolizes, and well is the source of water. He makes his way from Egypt into the desert through Midian, and he's thirsty. So he sits down. He's tired, right? And of course, Pharaoh, he cannot go back to Egypt, so he settles in Midian. From the delta, the Nile Delta, remember the Jewish people built the cities of Ramesses and Pithom here, and they are located somewhere right around here. And he's got to make his way to the land of Midian. The land of Midian actually extends from Arabia here to this area right here. So where is Midian biblically? It is this entire area, because the people of Midian were nomads. But just to give you an idea where Midian comes from, the people of Midian are cousins to the Israelites. We go back to Genesis, which is also written by Moses, and he's given you the not the back story, but the back genealogy, if you will. Abraham took another wife. This is after Sarah dies. Name is Keturah, and she was younger, and she bore to him Zimran and Yokshan and Medan and Midian and Ishbak and Shua. So Midian is another child of Abraham. So in other words, a immediate cousin to Isaac, and of course extended cousins with Jacob and their children and so on. So Israel and Midian although they are separate, they are family. They are from the same bloodline, Abraham. This is, just FYI, an ancient biblical type well. This is the kind of well that he would have sat in. This well, of course, has seen better days, but you can use your imagination. Right? So when we get to our text now, the shepherd of Midian, we are going to see basically that Moses is going to take a wife. He's going to settle down in this region, Midian. He's going to have another life. He's going to have an entirely new life. His old life as the Egyptian prince is over, and one now as a shepherd of Midian begins. And he takes a wife and he raises his family among the Gentiles. Well, let's read how the story unfolds in the Bible. And then, of course, we're going to see and contrast how the Bible tells the story and what details the Bible provides. And then we'll see how Hollywood tells the story. In fact, we'll look at two examples of how Hollywood tells the same story. And we'll see what details they have added, and if any that they've subtracted. So the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. Priest of Midian, his name is Reuel, friend of God. Also referred to later on in Exodus as Jethro, in the Torah as so whether he's Jethro is a title, it's his priestly title, is the priest of Midian. But Reuel, his name, friend of God, priest of Midian, had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Well, then the shepherds came and drove them, who's them? The daughters of the priest of Midian away. Now, when you look at this passage, just take a look at it real quickly. You see what you're supposed to see before you even get to verse 17. The priest of Midian has 7 daughters. What's missing in this description? 7 daughters and no sons. Right? So you're looking and say 7, that's awesome. Your fertility is a blessing of God, but there's no men. And so the women are forced to do what they need to do in the absence of men. They came to draw water, fill the troughs, to water their father's flock. No, it's not their flock, it's their father's flock, right? This is the way it was. The shepherds, other shepherds from the region came and drove them away, which wouldn't have happened if Jethro had sons, but instead he has daughters, and they're unable to withstand the overpowering of the shepherds, these bullies. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. So, again, in this act of gallantry, you see Moses defending 7 daughters, in a sense, reading between the lines, acting as a son to Reuel, to Jethro. But this is all that Scripture says about this event. Let's see how Hollywood presents the story. First once, and then twice. So in 1956, and then I believe in 1996. Okay, so 40 years later. All right, well, that's how Hollywood told the story. This one little verse 16 and 17, or 2 verses, 16 and 17, this is how they filled in the details. Now let's look in the 90s, 40 years later, how this was treated. Same verses, how they were treated by Hollywood 40 years later. All right, so now we have 2 different versions of this same story, separated by 4 decades. And you can see why, for example, this short little passage, it's only 2 chapters before we get to the burning bush, why it takes 2 hours to get through 2 short chapters in the 10 Commandments, and why it takes a solid 45 minutes in the Prince of Egypt, the cartoon version, because there's not a lot of detail in the text. So if you want detail, you'll need to expand the story. But we don't need to expand the story, because if we can read between the lines, we see plenty of story that Hollywood has left out, that Hollywood has forgotten. So if we read this next passage, verse 18, when they, the daughters, came to Reuel, their father, the priest of Midian, he said, "Why have you come back so soon today?" And they tell the story. "An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds. And what is more, he even drew the water for us and watered the flock." Okay, so far so good. We have a little more detail, and that corresponds with some of the film clip that we have seen, although I am sure that Hollywood's not interested in showing us Moses watering the flock, this desert flock. But what it does reveal to us is not only that Moses is heroic. We've already seen Moses' heroism in defending the Israelite slave who is in danger of losing his life. He saves the Israelite slave by taking the life of the Egyptian. Moses has stood in. He is a deliverer, even though he's not recognized by his own people. Next time we see Moses, he's fled. He's in a new land. The first thing we see him do after sitting by the well, why did he sit by the well again? Because he's tired. He says, not with words, but with actions, he delivers the Midianite women, the 7 daughters of the priest of Midian. And in one version of Hollywood, we have a very athletic Moses who uses his physicality to overwhelm the threat. In the cartoon version, we see not a physical, athletic Moses, but we see a clever Moses who uses his wits in unleashing the camels, and so solves the problem that way. So in one version, athleticism solves the day. In another version, wits solve the day. It doesn't tell us how he delivered them. It just tells us that he did. He is a deliverer, and they use the very word. Moses delivered us. We are to, as readers, identify Moses as the deliverer. He's good in Egypt. He's good to go in Midian. Wherever he is built in his DNA, his purpose, his ultimate destiny is to be a deliverer. And so he acts consistently through the storyline. And he even goes the extra mile by drawing the water for them and watering the flock. To which, of course, I'm sure the modern audience, a portion of the modern audience would say, "Oh, Moses, yes, he mansplained how to do the proper watering and feeding and drawing from a well, as only a man can do it, and disrespected the women by making them feel like they couldn't do the job." Now, that's how it might read in a newspaper, if a newspaper were reporting this today. Right? But we can see that wasn't their opinion. Right? Moses, the very definition of patriarchy, no. He's a deliverer. He's a hero. He's the hero of this story, which is great. And then you get, and I don't know why this is not in any of the films, right? The next line is comedy gold. He said to his daughters, well, if he delivered you and he did all of this for you, and he chased off the men, and then he backbreakingly drew the water from the well, and then watered the sheep, he says to the daughters, well, where is he then? Why have you left the man behind? Why didn't you take him home? Do you think he wouldn't be hungry? Do you think that it's hospitality? This is the hospitality of the nomad, the desert nomad, this is a shameful affront not to offer someone didn't matter if he delivered or didn't deliver or whatever. If he is a stranger in your territory, in your home, in the home area, then you bring him in and you offer him hospitality. You have not offered him hospitality, and you've brought shame to me. Why is it you've left this man behind? Invite him to have something to eat. That's a very important passage. Moses was willing to dwell with the man, and he, the man, gave not only Moses something to eat, he gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses. So I love this passage because it opens up the world of the Bible to us in a way that, while I love Hollywood and it's neat to see some of the special effects, of course, parting the sea and some of the great chariot stuff going on, but the kind of insights that are provided by just within the text somehow are missed by even the best scriptwriters and directors of Hollywood. So Reuel, Jethro, extended the Middle Eastern hospitality, typical Middle Eastern hospitality, right? Come and have dinner and take my daughter as well. Take my daughter, please. And we read the remainder of the passage. She gave him a son. Look at the compression of time here. So within the same verse, he's having dinner, and then he's having a marriage, and one verse later, he has a son. It's compression of time, tight compression of time. And they named this son Gershom. She gave birth to a son. He named him Gershom. Gershom, Ger, is sojourner. Right? That's why Sojourner Ministries is the name of my organization. Ger means a sojourner or a stranger. For he said, this is so a stranger there, Gershom. He said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. Now, in Midian, he is a Hebrew. What's a Hebrew doing in Midian? Talk about being a minority. But he is also an Egyptian. And there's no Egyptians in Midian, so whether you want to view him as an Egyptian or a Hebrew, he is a sojourner in a foreign land. The circumstances, and this is to highlight for this, they don't give us the second child and why the second child is named what he's named. And they're giving the insight right now into the child's name, the first child's name, to give some insight into where Moses is in the narrative. He's displaced. Where does Moses belong? Belongs back in Egypt with his people, delivering the Hebrews. But even Moses knows, I'm a sojourner. I'm one who has been banished from my proper place. I've been displaced. I cannot go home. And there in Midian, Moses will remain, shepherding flocks. And all the while, as the decades pass, all the while growing familiar with the topography of the Sinai wilderness, the ins, the outs, the sources of water, the treacherous places to traverse, the safe passages. And of interest to you might be that while Moses takes his place as a shepherd, to the Egyptian, within the Egyptian culture, to be a shepherd was a detestable profession. So there's nothing neutral within the story, within the culture, within the world of the Bible in which we find Moses. He is not in a neutral position. Midian is a place of displacement for him. His job, his profession, his activity, not just any old job. the lowest rung in Egyptian culture. So if you thought a slave was low, shepherd also. Detestable. Verse 23. Now it came about in the course of those many days, by which Moses means here a whole lot of decades. 4 decades are going to go by. But this compression, in the course of those many days, Moses does not want to tell. His purpose in writing Exodus is not to give you all the details. Let me tell you about what marital life is like in Midian. Let me tell you what it's like to raise sheep in Midian and to raise my family in Midian. This is not Moses' point in telling the story. So he's getting to the next salient point in the narrative, what Moses considers salient. Came in the course of those many days, the king of Egypt died. This is the king who attempted to kill him. Again, the Pharaoh, not mentioned by name. Not important. We have Moses' son named, but the most powerful individual in the region, entire Middle East, Near East, not named. One Pharaoh is like another in this narrative. Pharaohs come and go. Unlike our God, who in the next chapter is going to reveal his sacred name, Pharaoh is an interchangeable God-man. Doesn't matter. Don't waste the ink. Don't waste the parchment on recording his name, because pharaohs come and go. And this one came, and this one went. But Pharaoh is not the issue here. The position of the Israelites and the relationship of God to his people is what's key in this verse. We still find the Israelites enslaved. The Pharaoh has come. Thutmose III has died. New one, his son, Amenhotep II, has risen. But the sons of Israel, I don't like this translation, sighed. When I think of sighing in today's parlance and our normal use of the English term to sigh means I'm going to go outside after saying goodbye to everybody today and shaking a lot of hands and hugging and whatever else and exchanging pleasantries. And I'm going to go out into the midday heat of Texas and I'm going to go, hey, or the like, all right? And so will you, some less audibly than I, but that's okay. When I get up, when I sit down, when I'm coming in and coming out, a little exclamation, a little verbal representation. But that's not what they're doing. They're crying out, as we can see in the next phrase. They sighed. They cried out. They exhaled with such ferocity, asking the Lord, their God, to break the shackles of Egyptian bondage, to unleash the lash of Egypt from their backs. They sighed out because of their bondage. In desperation. It's the first time. Listen, it's nice now in the narrative. We finally heard what happened to the Israelites, that they were victims of genocide and that they were enslaved. But we haven't seen anything from their perspective, any reaction. But now finally we see the reaction, some insights. And they cry out to God. And we know they cry out to God because of the direction that their cry goes. It rises up. Their cry for help, help from whom? Not from the great bird of the universe, not from the flying spaghetti monster, which, depending on how you cook it, could or could not be kosher. They cry out to their God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Their cry for help because of their bondage rose up to God. Well, I'm hoping that I get a response from God. I'd like to hear. I've seen a response now from the Hebrews to their horrible situation. Verse 24. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them. So the Hebrews direct their cry to their God. This evokes a fourfold divine response. A fourfold. In other words, God responds 4 different ways in the text. First of all, he heard their groaning. God heard their groaning. Meaning, when it says when he heard, when the Hear, O Israel, when we say Hear, O Israel, Shema Yisrael, right? What does it mean? Does it mean to listen? Pay attention? Or no, it means to hear with intent to action. There is always the practical aspect. When we talk about hearing in Hebrew, it is hearing with the intent to action. When we talk about the blowing of the shofar at the opening of every service that we do, is it because it's like an alarm clock that I'm setting off to tell you, just like when we were in elementary school or high school and the bell rang and we knew it was time to get into our classroom? Right? A little signal that we should respond like a Pavlov dog? No. When we hear the shofar is blown so that not only we listen and it moves us into position, but that we hear it, and the intent to action is not simply to get you into position so that we can begin our service, but that your hearts are prepared, your minds are steeled, your hearts open, your hands ready to receive that which you'll experience in the service. And hands ready to serve as necessary. Not just to provide an offering to support the ongoing work here, but to give back to God in thankfulness for all he's done for you. So it's an intent to action. Hearing with the intent to action. He heard their groaning. And then God remembered. What does he remember? His covenant with the Hebrew patriarchs that he established with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. We'll talk about that momentarily as we end our message today. Because the covenant that God made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it's called the Abrahamic covenant, just for shorthand. The Abrahamic covenant that God initially makes with Abraham, reiterates to his children, grandchild. The covenant is his basis of the intent to act. So God hears, I want to respond. On what basis am I, the God of the universe, going to respond? It's going to be on the basis of the covenant that he's already established. And as the God who sees all, he looked at the Israelites. He saw them. And he took notice of them. So not only to see, God sees all, of course he sees the sons of Israel. It means that not only does he see their plight, but his action is going to result in the termination of their suffering. So hearing with the intent to action based upon the Abrahamic covenant established with the Hebrew people 400 years prior, and is now going to finish the job. He sees, and he's going to take their suffering and terminate it. It'll be the end of it. So when we reach this passage, it is critical, it's crucial that we understand the means by which God is going to do everything he does throughout the rest of Exodus. And that requires a certain familiarity with the Abrahamic covenant, which is the central facet of the book of Genesis. If you were to ask, a person on the street, if they even could tell you where Genesis was or anything in Genesis, your average person might know that Genesis contains the creation of the world and say, well, what's the point of Genesis? Well, to tell us that God created the heavens and the earth and creation of everything by God. That's not the purpose of Genesis. It's part of prologue. All right, maybe the purpose of Genesis is to tell us why the rainbow is not a symbol. Originally is not a symbol of gay pride. Okay, it was co-opted. The rainbow is a symbol of God's covenant with all of humanity, twisted and put into other use by subculture. But nonetheless, a promise that God will never again destroy the earth by flood. Is that the purpose of Genesis? No, that's not the purpose of Genesis. That's also prologue. Or maybe to explain to us why we all speak different languages, Tower of Babel. No! The centerpiece of Genesis is the relationship that God has with Abraham, initiated by God himself, not by Abraham and his insights, his tremendous insight. Hey, I'm going to invent monotheism. Check me out. Dig me out. I'll invent ethical monotheism. I'm the father of ethical monotheism. No, you're not. You're the father of many nations. That's what Abraham means. Abraham doesn't discover monotheism, ethical or not. God is revealed to him by God himself. God initiates. Abraham didn't initiate. God initiates. And just as God initiates a relationship with Abraham, and over a course of 6 recorded encounters, beginning in Genesis 12, and going all the way through Genesis 22, God reveals to Abraham over 6 successive interactions over time and geographic distance, the promises, the contract he's making unconditionally with him, which then he then reiterates with the next generation and reiterates again, reiterates with Abraham's grandchild, Jacob. That's the central focus. When you look at stuff that's repeated again, that's always going to give you what the theme is. And so the covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, is critical in not only understanding Genesis, but in understanding every action and reaction that God has in the book of Exodus. Everything that happens is based upon what he's already promised in Genesis. So if you don't dig the Abrahamic covenant, you're going to miss a whole lot. You might as well just pull up a film, pull up a Blu-ray, and watch a cartoon or watch Chucky Heston. Right? That'll be entertaining for you. You'll probably get just as much out of it as trying to read Exodus without a background of the Abrahamic covenant in your back pocket. Well, going back to the Abrahamic covenant, we're going to go very quickly in 5 minutes. The Abrahamic covenant in 6 minutes. The Lord said to Avram, go forth from your country, from your relatives, and from your father's house to the land I will show you. Genesis 12, 1, 2, and 3. And I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you. I'll make your name great, and you will be a blessing. So land, seed, blessing are the keys to the Abrahamic covenant. I will bless those who bless you. This is reciprocal justice. So as you are your people, your progeny, are blessed by others, I will bless them. If they treat you otherwise, one who curses you, I will curse. Retributive justice. I will do to them as they do to you. Another great sub-themes of the Bible. We see the Abrahamic covenant playing out throughout not only the Torah, that book of Exodus, but we see throughout the rest of Scripture and in world history, but that's another message. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. So your progeny will wind up blessing all the nations of the earth. That's a pretty awesome set of promises. That's the core of the Abrahamic covenant. The Lord appeared to Avram, this is later on, the same chapter, to your descendants I will give this land. Again, land of Canaan, seed, many descendants, and blessing. Both I'll bless you and how others are blessed in relationship to you. Right? And so he built an altar. So another chapter goes by. The Lord says to Avram, after Lot, his nephew, had separated, lift up your eyes, look from the place where you are. Now you get some detail. Well, land is nice, but how about some detail? So look northward and southward, eastward and westward. In other words, look in every direction. And all the land you see, I give it to you and your descendants forever. So the land in every direction, it's a little vague, but I'll take it for now for chapter 13. And it's given to you. Great, but to who else? To your descendants forever. To the people of Israel is given to this land is given to them forever, in perpetuity. And I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, numerous descendants. This is the greatness of the Jewish people. Not great as in, look, dig us, Jews are awesome. No, numerous as the dust of the earth. Great as in numerous. So that anyone can number the dust of the earth, your descendants will also be numbered. Arise, walk about, in case your eyes are not all they should be at your age. Expand your vision by walking the length and breadth and width of the land. I give it to you. 2 chapters later, God took Abraham outside and said, look toward the heavens. So he just had him in chapter 13. Look at the dust, look down, okay? Well, now you got a crick in your neck. Okay, let's exercise that 2 chapters later. Look up, all right? If dust didn't communicate to you, how about we use another metaphor? Count the stars. If you're able to count them, so shall your descendants be. Again, a great nation, a numerous nation. And he said, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. Once again, the promise of descendants, the promise of land. So you'll not only have a great nation coming forth from you, but they'll have a place to live as well. That will be theirs. God said to Abram, know for certain, I'm skipping a lot of stuff as you know, Genesis 12, 13, and 15. But God said to Abram, verse 13, know for certain, here's the setup for Exodus, your descendants will be strangers. Oh, sojourner, this is this term. I'm a stranger in this land, Moses said. They will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. At the time that Moses is in Midian, how long have the Jewish people been in Egypt? 400, give or take, right? A few years. Enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will judge the nation whom they will serve. We know, reading now, that that's Egypt. Afterward, they will come out with many possessions. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, to your descendants I've given the land from the river of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. This is a little bit more specific, in fact, a lot more specific than just take a look, north, south, east, west, it's all yours, or walk this way, walk that way, turn around, do a hora. This is very specific now. We got some borders. The river of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. So we have at least 2 boundaries to the land, but we have the geographic locations. Remember we talked, a lot of time we talked, but we talked even today about the inhabitants of the land during our Torah portion. We talked about the inhabitants of the land that the Israelites were commanded to conquer, to displace. And there was not just one people called the Canaanites that had their own, it's not like the imperialistic Israelites drove out an indigenous national state of people who had been living there. There's no state called Canaan at that time that Israel occupied. No, no, no. There were regional, nomadic, regional groups. Like, who was living in Canaan at the time? Who will they be displacing? The Kenite. They play with dolls, Barbies and others. The Kenizzite, the Cadmonite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Kryptonite, that's in case Superman comes, the Rephaim, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Girgashite, the Jeb. You have a variety of these little hamlets, of these little areas, little fiefdoms of the people of the day. Nobody's got their own state. You're going to be the first actual United State, confederation in this land. But these people are going to be removed. And our Torah portion today revealed why, but the Abrahamic covenant reveals why as well. It says they are polluting the land with their idolatrous practices. Not just that they believe in idols. That's just the begin. It's what stems from the worship of idols. It's the child sacrifice. It's the pornographic worship that is entailed in worshiping. They are polluting the land. Why couldn't they be removed in the time of Abraham? Because they hadn't sufficiently polluted the land for a just God to have them removed. They were just only getting warmed up with their iniquities. But that cup will be, in 400 years, that cup and how is going to be filled. And by the time that they're ready for the Lord God to open up a big can of his holy justice, that will be the moment that after 400 years in the womb of Egypt and 40 years wandering in the desert, having received the law at Sinai and divine instruction, that will be the moment that they will be ready to be displaced and conquered by these children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So we cannot proceed to the burning bush, in other words, until we dealt with the Abrahamic covenant. And why God is going to do everything that he's going to do from chapter 3 all the way to the end of the book. So we will delve into chapter 3 next time. For those of you unaware of the contents of chapter 3, that is the burning bush, God's encounter with the holy God. Right now, God has been the actor, in a sense, behind the scenes in the book of Exodus. But beginning in chapter 3, we're going to see him take center stage. And what an entrance, a more dramatic entrance, no actor could ever ask for. But for the time being, I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave you in suspense. We'll deal with that next week.